Hello and welcome to Minerals, Rocks, and Fossil Talks. I'm your paleo teacher, Jen, and it's time for Monday Musings. And I apologize, my lizard is going to make a lot of noise. I just fed him and he's very excited. Anyway, sometimes it may feel like there are so many fossils out there. Just this year, at least 117 new fossils have been scientifically described. That seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, we actually don't have that many fossils preserved. In fact, it is estimated that less than 1% of everything that's ever lived was fossilized. That is a ridiculously tiny number, and it's really hard to wrap our minds around. So, if it is so hard to become a fossil, how does an organism get fossilized in the first place? Well, step one, the organism has to die. Not necessarily by asteroid, but it does have to die. We can't have any of these, like, buried alive shenanigans. That would make field season very interesting and kind of freaky, and I don't know that I'd want to go back out if we found something buried alive. Ugh. Anyway, second, after the organism dies, it must be buried quickly before it has a chance to decay, preferably somewhere without oxygen. Oxygen allows bacteria to thrive, and bacteria are what cause organisms to decay. So we want to prevent that by removing the oxygen that would allow other things to grow. So places that allow for things like that are the bottom of the ocean, or deep lakes, river deltas, lagoons, swamps, floodplains, volcanic ash, and tar pits. All of these prevent oxygen and bacteria from growing. They're excellent places for fossilization. Plus, there's a lot of sediment that gets brought in and covers things quickly. Places that aren't so great are like rainforests. Rainforests are too acidic, and so they end up kind of breaking down things faster, which is great for a rainforest environment, but not so great at preserving what those environments are like. And mountains and deserts are erosional environments, meaning that they're uncovering things rather than covering things up. So they're not depositional, and they're just not great at fossil preservation for those reasons. That's not to say that things can't be preserved. After all, dinosaur and other animals' footprints have been found in early Jurassic desert dunes, like this one, in Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. So it can happen, they're just not abundant. I've done a lot of hiking through those desert dunes. This was the first fossil that colleagues and I had ever found in those dunes, and it was by accident. We were climbing down a gully, we put our hand down, and my buddy was like, "Hey, it looks like a footprint." And it was kind of a freak thing to happen. So they happen, just not common. And they're not as often, just not as well, they're not as pretty as, say, a full ichthyosaur skeleton from the Jurassic Coast. I was going to show you one of those, but TikTok is being really dumb right now, and it's not giving me the right green screen, and there's so many options that I can't, and they all look identical. So I'm just going to complain momentarily about how awful TikTok is getting with all this extra crap they're throwing in here that are so useless. Anyway, the third step is that it really, really helps to have hard parts like a skeleton or a shell. Soft tissues tend to break down very quickly and are hard to preserve. This is part of the reason why it took us so long to realize that life started before the Cambrian explosion. We're discovering now that the Cambrian explosion was more of a, whoa, suddenly there's hard parts on the scene, and there's a lot of things developing them. Prior to that, everything was soft-bodied, and they looked funky, and so we didn't realize what we were looking at. Hard parts go a long way in making it easier for us, and just easier to be preserved in the long run. It's also important how those hard parts go together. Skeletons have like cartilage and other soft tissues in between, and the more flexible a joint is, the easier it is for it to pop off after death. That's why we don't have very many sauropod heads. If you notice, your head moves a lot more than, say, like your fingers, which coincidentally we don't find a lot of just because they're small and easy to carry off. But anyway, it's a totally different reason. But if your joints move a lot, once they decay and those soft tissues and cartilages are gone, so goes that body part. And it's easier for carnivores to take off with things that break off a little easier, which is why, say, sacrums, so like hips, right? All of that is fused. And so it's a lot easier to find hips than it would be to find, say, a skull intact, because it's just harder for that to break down. And then lastly, hopefully the fossil doesn't get destroyed by geologic processes such as erosion or tectonic folding and faulting, mountain building, all that fun stuff, because the earth has a tendency to break itself and anything that's trapped in it. So if you can avoid all of these pitfalls, then we've got a fossil, and we got a good fossil maybe. But as you can see, that is not an easy feat. Well, thank you for coming to today's lesson. Hope you learned a lot. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for some fun trivia and see if you retained anything you learned today. And I will fossilise you later.